To another season of Forge Fireside, a monthly chat, conversation, if you will, about the people and ideas that advance our entrepreneurial ecosystems. My name is Brian Ellerman. I'm the founding executive director of Forge, which is finding opportunities and resources to grow entrepreneurs. Forge is the entrepreneurial mindset unit of the University of Arizona. We focus on cultivating student entrepreneurial mindset in our students, in supporting and advancing our communities and ecosystems, and in accelerating the growth and exit for promising startups. As part of Fireside, a weekly chat, my guest today is Harry Wilcox. Harry is the general partner at Flagship Pioneering and also the chairman and CEO of Your Bio Health. All based in Boston, I assume, Harry?
That's right outside of Boston, Cambridge.
So welcome to our lovely day well, I assume your weather's cooler today than it is here in Tucson. I assume that's a safe bet. Thanks for joining us. I do want to share, as I also mentioned on LinkedIn and elsewhere, that Harry has been a very strong supporter of Forge and its programs, and in particular our biomedical entrepreneur scholarship program. And for that, Harry, thank you ever so much for that support. And it is in many ways, including hearing the students and giving them feedback on their pitches, which I think was probably one of the most daunting and also successful parts of the entire program for the students. So in our chats, and we try to kind of start at the beginning. One theme is always that very often when I meet with students and others, they kind of make this association that whatever you major in, that must be what you go and do. And my living goal is to disprove that at every opportunity. And so would you tell us, Harry, a little bit about your upbringing? Where'd you grow up? Where did you go to school? And were you a good student?
Well, that's a tough question. I'd like to take the fifth on that one, but I don't think I was a particularly good student, but I grew up all over the United States. I was born in upstate New York, lived a couple places up there, lived in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, California, Arizona, and then my parents, after I went to college, they moved on to Chicago and to Rhode Island. And my father was an electrical engineer who developed an expertise in manufacturing operations. And they'd say to him, "Hey, we have this great opportunity for you to fix a plant in Williamsport, Pennsylvania." He would start to come home early from work, and that's how we knew we were moving. That whatever was going on at work was fixed, and he was ready. And so he ended up sort of at the end of his career running big divisions of industrial companies. And the funny thing that I tell, the story that I tell about that is, I was always involved in biotech companies, most of which never got a product to market. And my father would say to me, "Well, how are things this quarter?" And I'd say, "Well, we're advancing clinical candidates along, either drugs or devices. And I'd say in 8 or 10 years, we'll probably have a product if things go well." And he didn't see how companies could stay in existence, without products for 8 or 10 years, but we did.
Well, maybe in our conversation today, we can get to investing in the bio life sciences, because goodness knows that's patient capital when you understand that long tail.
Yeah, definitely.
So, kind of to my thesis, how aligned would you say your education was to what you're doing today?
I would say there's almost no alignment. So I ended up having a bunch of different majors at the University of Arizona. And I think to finally graduate, I ended up with a finance major. And then I went and got my MBA. And to be honest, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. what kind of industry I wanted to be in. So I ended up joining, in those days, it was the big 8 public accounting firms. I went to work for Price Waterhouse. And my idea was that I would get exposure to a lot of different industries and companies. And their idea was that I become a healthcare expert. And so I was a healthcare expert and ended up, looking at both healthcare services, things like hospitals and nursing homes. In those days, it was really early stage biotech things and some big pharma. And lasted at that for a couple of years, not long enough to get certified. And then pretty much moved away from the whole accounting world in a progression as my career went on. And
well, you preempted my next question, which was going to be your first job. So I'm kind of curious, from taking those initial roles, when did you, reach the executive level? And can you talk a little bit about a key lesson that you learned in getting there?
Yeah, so the first job after public accounting is I went to work for Ocean Spray Cranberries, which is an agricultural co-op. And I basically got a lot involved in a lot of different things there that were much more operationally oriented. And it was partially because I wanted to, those were the things that interested me, and partially because they were looking for, general manager type people that they could grow up. And, it doesn't, it was things like product managers and plant managers and that kind of thing. It was about a $500 million revenue company then. So I pretty rapidly moved away from finance or at least accounting, because it always felt to me like I was looking over somebody else's shoulder to see how they had done versus getting the opportunity to do it myself. And I don't want to discourage anybody who's thinking that they want to be a public accountant, because you learn a lot about a lot of different industries and there's all sorts of different things to get involved in. But for me personally, I wanted to be more on the side of, developing strategy, making decisions, and Ocean Spray enabled me to do that.
So you had, how far in were you at this point? Like how post MBA, how many years had you been in industry?
About 4 or 5 years by then. Yeah.
Okay. So, how long did you feel like you needed to be in industry before, well, I'm not going to be facetious, say you stopped making mistakes, but where you started to recognize the value of those mistakes and whether, do you have a good failure story you might be able to share that really shaped you and your mindset?
I still think I'm making and learning from mistakes. So one of them, though, was I think it was probably my third job. I was hired to be the head of finance and corporate development for a company that uses cells as a therapeutic. And today we read about that, and it's pretty common practice. I think we were the first cell-based therapy. And I remember joining the company, and the first day I was there, I was reading sort of a business plan strategy document. And it said, we're going to change the way medicine is practiced. And now whenever I see that line written in somebody's strategy statement or that kind of thing, my antenna go right up, because, to change in any industry, a well-established set of practices and systems is really hard. And if you're trying to do that and develop a new therapeutic, I just think that's a mistake that I learned from, and one that still stays with me, is you have to fit into, for the most part, you have to fit into the existing industries. And I don't know if this is a good analogy or not, but you say, well, Elon Musk didn't do that. He came out with an electric car and totally upended the industry. Well, it's true, but those cars are still sold through dealerships. They still have to have a big service component. They still have to get somewhere to replenish their energy. So it really, it's an innovation, but it didn't change the industry, you know, and I don't think there are many that did change industries. Maybe something like Apple, where, you know, the innovation was so great, it changed how music and books and all sorts of things are sold. So, but it's pretty rare. So I really look for, as an investor or as an operating person, I really am sensitive to this idea we're going to change how something is practiced. You know, you're going to influence it, but you got to fit into the system too.
Well, so you're talking about, you know, being there, changing things or trying to, and Flagship Pioneering, you know, perhaps among its most famous portfolio elements is of course the what we all have thanks to COVID, you know, come to know and very directly impact our life. Can you talk a little bit about, to the extent that, you know, I don't know how much is sort of inside the shop and how much you can share publicly, you know, but what can you talk about in terms of the origin and the role and taking that courageous stand in a very established field, you know, in vaccines?
Yeah. So just to give a little background, vaccines were not seen as a very exciting part of drug development. They needed, you know, eventually government assistance with insurance programs and things like that, because they're sort of they're just as hard to develop as a lot of other drugs, and you don't get paid very well to do it. So so you sort of say, well, why work on that when I can cure some other disease and do really well at the same time? But so Moderna was originally, the original thought from Moderna came from a paper that was published at Mass General Hospital, where a scientist had figured out a way of using and altering RNA to take cells and regress them back to cells that could be made into anything else. So, you know, when we all start out, their two cells come together, and those cells differentiate into every single cell that's in the human body, just from the source of those two cells. And what this person had done is figured out a way to take, say, a skin cell and regress it back to a totally naive cell that could become anything else. And it was an interesting research tool. It was exciting science. And two guys in my firm sat down and looked at that paper and said, wow, this guy has really missed the point of his invention. That what you can do with this technology, you know, or what you could do with this technology, and it had to be proven, was to introduce RNA into the body, and it would make any protein that the human body makes. And so as an example, you know, human growth hormone for children who don't achieve whatever normal stature is, and I don't know what what those words really mean, but they grow that up in big bioreactors using Chinese hamster ovary cells, actually, to make that protein. And what you could do with Moderna's technology, the hypothesis was, and if it worked, is instead of doing that, you could have mRNA injected into a person, and it would cause their own cells to make more of any protein. So it could be human growth hormone. And therefore, it would be physiologically 100% compatible to the patient. You know, I hesitate to use the word, but natural human growth hormone for that particular person. And the company started off along those lines, and one of the great stories I like about it was the CEO is a guy named Stefan Bancel, who we started to negotiate more than a year before he would join. And he said, no, you can't do that. That's impossible. And he's a scientist, and he was actually he was one of those big, he was an officer or executive at a company that made a lot of these proteins in bioreactors. He said, no, that won't work, And over the course of a year, presenting him with more and more data about the approach, we finally convinced him to join the company. And, he's done great things with the company and grown it very rapidly and drove through the vaccine. But originally the company wasn't aimed at vaccines. The way their vaccine works is you're essentially making that spike protein on the COVID virus and causing your body to have a heightened immune reaction to when it gets exposed to the virus. And they have about 40 other programs going on that are pretty exciting, and we'll see what happens with them. So that's really the innovation came from literally someone in our shop reading a paper and saying, wow, this is interesting science, but the author is missing the point.
Wow. Do you find, that reminds me of a lot of conversations that we have with founders where they've started out because they're looking at a specific problem that they're familiar with, but as an investor, you're seeing a completely different opportunity, potentially larger opportunity. How do you walk that path? Because in some ways, you're trying to tell them that I realize that's your child and your child is lovely, but over here is a much prettier child that we really think you should adopt and raise instead. How do you work through that with founders?
Well, we part of the reason, the exact story that you just told, or example, is why Flagship has a different strategy. So Flagship more has a strategy of hiring a bunch of really smart scientific and medical people and saying, here's a problem we'd like you to work on. And, don't worry if you can't solve this problem because we've got a long list of other problems. So it's okay if you fail. And we actually, sounds weird, but we celebrate failure a little bit in that the way we talk about it is we want our group of entrepreneurs that we put together to do the experiment that'll prove that something won't work. And maybe that's only appropriate in, the biomedical area, but I don't think it is. So we want them to sort of do the experiment that'll say, you know what, this won't work. And I think most entrepreneurs will do the opposite. So they want their idea to keep growing and flourishing and that kind of thing. And so they kind of do the experiments that they're pretty sure will work to provide evidence to investors and things like that they're on the right track. So we have a different approach. The other thing we do is we don't as we get to the point where we're actually forming a company and we put together teams from the people who worked on it and people who do this over and over again, we don't let them name them. So with all our companies, probably for until we're ready to sort of expose them to the public, have a number, and it's Venture Labs. I think we're up to 67 or something like that. And part of that's because we don't want people to sort of say to themselves, oh, I've told everybody I'm CEO of, Rosebud Company, and it's going to be embarrassing for me to go back to them and say, well, Rosebud didn't work out. And we really want to, encourage them to fail because it doesn't waste their time and it doesn't waste our time. And as a side benefit, it doesn't waste a lot of money. So if you're investing in a biotech company and with the first $5 million, you prove to yourself it didn't work out well, you probably saved hundreds of millions of dollars or billions. So that's how we approach it. And I'm not saying that's how, if you're not in that kind of ecosystem, that you can necessarily operate, but it's the way we operate. And one of the consequences of failing is you join another team with another idea to start off a new company. So, there's sort of no shame in it, and there's no risk. When I worked in Sweden for a while for a biotech company, and we had a tough time recruiting scientists to the team because the attitude in Sweden at that time, and this is in the late 90s, was if I come and work to you and this fails, that's the end of my career. And that's certainly not the case now, and it's not the case at Flagship. It's like, hey, you failed. You must have learned a lot.
You don't throw a party, do you? A failure party?
We actually have done that. We had a group come in who had incredibly bad data, and we had cupcakes and streamers for them.
Well, so that's a perfect segue, I think, into the last question that I had, which we talk about Forge and really being focused on the entrepreneur and entrepreneurial mindset, and I'm interested in your take, especially having heard what you just said about failure and taking the risks and embracing it. What is an entrepreneur to you, and how should entrepreneurs view failure and experimentation? I'll throw that in too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that entrepreneurs and innovation, that's the glue that drives at least the industries I've been involved with forward. So people willing to say, hey, I think this is a good idea. I want to try it. I want to explore this area. And I actually don't know all the answers at this point in time, but I'm willing to sort of step beyond the bounds of what other people might think is reasonable thought. I think you also have to balance that with always being paranoid. And from that point, I mean, not only to external events, but to your own thinking. Are you really fooling yourself with some piece of data where, you really kind of need to say, well, this isn't right. I need to pivot. I need to do something different. And so it's this strange balance of optimism and being paranoid, and looking at and as time goes on, kind of looking at competing approaches and saying, is mine really going to be better than that? Because in most spaces, and this isn't in all spaces, but being second, third, or fourth to the market with a mediocre product is not a good way to make a living. So I think it's this continually challenging yourself to see if I should believe the story and be excited about it. And at the same time, to attract funding and other employees and all those kinds of things, you have to be enthusiastic about the idea. So people join, at least biotech companies and probably a lot of others, people join because they love the story. And when I say join, it's join as a manager, invest. It's all about the story. And can I cure cancer? Can I detect cancer earlier? Can I stop people from having the horrible side effects of strokes? And can I fix diabetes? Those are big stories, and if you can get people excited about joining them, the people will flock to you, and the money will too, to develop those kind of companies. But you have to. So it's this weird balance of optimism and being paranoid.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you're touching on, in this notion of running experiments or failing fast, I mean, that does take a certain amount of resilience on the part of the entrepreneur, right? They especially because I think it's so easy to fall become cynical about things, and I think that it's especially true on the investor side, where you see hundreds or thousands of claims, and you can't prosecute them all. You have to filter, and so would you do you give a lot of credibility to the entrepreneurs or the ideas, the people who show themselves to be open to trying? Like, is that the person that's going to get more attention and support from you than the person who says, nope, I know how to do it and it's this way? Like, what's your
I mean, it's a really interesting question, and I hate to say it, but some of it is personality. Like you need this person who you say to yourself, wait, they're going to run through walls to make this happen. And at the same time, you need to find a person who realizes that they're probably not going to run through concrete walls. So I actually think that I guess if I were to default to one decision or the other, I'd probably default to the eternal optimist who thinks that they can solve every problem, because as a board member, slash investor slash whatever else, I think if I come to the conclusion it's not going to work, ultimately I have a lot of tools to stop that person.
Okay. Yeah. I think too experimentation is challenging if you are running on an investor's dollars, right? So this is a curious question to ask an investor, but I know I often have a conversation with people who ask about taking outside capital. And my recommendation to them is always wait as long as possible, potentially forever, because it's your own energy and equity. But I wonder how you feel about that, and whether you find yourself offering similar advice or do you offer different advice?
Well, I have to sort of put on two different hats, because a long time ago I was really a venture investor, and now we think of ourselves as owners, and can put $200 million in each company if we want to. So I think taking the right kind of capital is really important. And so if you're taking capital from somebody who doesn't really understand your space, or has a shorter term outlook than you do on a liquidity event and that kind of thing, then I agree with you. I'd wait as long as possible to take that kind of money. And I've been like other startup people in situations where I had to take money from whoever would give it to me. But so I think trying to match yourself up with capital that thinks about what you're trying to do the same way you do as the entrepreneur. And then at a certain point, when your company gets really hot and exciting, and you can raise money at really high valuations and raise lots of it, it really does become a weapon that you can use in your development plans. So I think we started Moderna out with $10 million. And the first deal we did, we got Merck to agree to support 10 programs, and they put in $400 million, which really, made it possible to build out a lot of the infrastructure that actually eventually led to the vaccine business, that being able to be in the vaccine business. And so, that was a unique situation where you had this big story to tell, a really senior CEO involved, some great people on the board, from Tim Springer and Bob Langer and people who were just really well known. So that it's all over the map, depending on how exciting and the amount of gravity you're pulling into your startup. But I think you're right. I would hold off as long as I could, using non-investor dollars, and then really look for investors who thought about my company the same way I was thinking about it.
We like to talk about dumb money versus smart money,
Yeah.
right? The dumb money is just taking anybody. So in any case, I really appreciate that perspective. We had one question which I'm very entertained by, because I'm going to ask you, and you can think back. So how did your mistakes as a student shape your path as a professional?
Well, I mean, I think that, my time as an undergraduate, I was able to explore a lot of different things. So I started out as a biology chemistry major, spent some time, getting into the School of Architecture and then getting out of it, and then switching over to business. And what that taught me was to be open to learning about all different things. And so at various times I've been, the CEO of a neuroscience company and the CEO of a cell therapy company, and, doing all these different things where from a science point of view, I was like way over my head. But I also was willing to learn about these other things and basically work with MDs and chief scientific officers and things like that to be tutored so that I could, reasonably talk to investors and other companies about our technologies. So I think that if you have the opportunity on that undergraduate side of things, try a bunch of different things and just be open to learning about them, and, kind of make the professors make you understand it or not. I mean, it's, I don't know if that answers the question, but that's the way I think about it. And I appreciate that experience of being able to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think what I hear in your story, Harry, I mean, for one, there's a great deal of humility, which is incredibly impressive. And you think about like where we've come from, or where you've come from, and where you've arrived to, and recognizing the fact that there was definitely that point in time we all arrived at where we really didn't know what we didn't know. Wow, what a eye-opening experience it was. And so I think then your other trait that you've demonstrated today is this kind of constant learning, constant inquiry element of asking questions, asking the why, trying to get at, is that the right explanation for something? And it sounds to me like those two traits have served you incredibly well in your life and in your career.
Yeah, thank you. I think that I've been incredibly lucky to work with a lot of really smart people and to learn from them. And I think being open to those experiences. When I joined Flagship, the two founders were both like 6'6" and PhDs and really smart people. And, I'm like 5'7", and I tell people they recruited me to lower the average height and the average IQ. And so, and I really, I just ask questions until I either get to the point where I understand it and somebody's taught me something, or I come to the conclusion they don't really know it because they can't explain it to somebody who wants to learn. So that's probably the biggest thing I learned over my career.
I like that. I had forgotten we were talking about the long tail of bio life science and investing, and an audience question came in. What's the longest timeline you've seen to bring a product to market?
I've seen, so the company I'm running right now has been around for 12 years and $100 million has gone into it. And we just launched our product last year. So
that's patient capital.
Yeah, that is patient capital. And, Moderna was around for about 10 years too. So our view in how long we hold on to companies and that kind of thing is, and this is sort of a luxury, is As long as they're creating value at a rapid rate, we're happy to stay involved with them. I don't think that other fund structures necessarily allow you to do that, that they have an end, and, we just stop charging our limited partners management fees and go as long as we want to go. So,
well, I think there is also a message in there as well, especially for those aspiring life science, biomedical life science would-be founders, is the understanding that you have to find investors who are equally patient, who understand this. Kind of back to the dumb money, smart money. If the investor is looking for a fast payout and exit, well, guess what? This is not the right industry for you. And also, I think you've also pointed out the fact that the domain knowledge is so vitally important. Doing diligence and understanding both the risk, the technical risk, the regulatory risk, all of these aspects is not for the faint of heart. It takes time and expertise to develop. So it does live in its own kind of world.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I have to say that, I feel really lucky to have ended up in this industry, because you are doing something good for society, whether it's on the human health side or the sustainability side. You're dealing with people who are really smart and driven to make a difference in people's lives. And, if it works, you can do financially really well. So, I mean, that's a nice side effect of doing something good, so I've really enjoyed it. And, I plan on staying active in it in some way after I retire.
Well, that is a perfect note to end on, Harry. And I really thank you again for your time and meeting with us today and talking about your journey and inspiring us to go out and try to make some mistakes and celebrate them.
Well, I really thank you all, and I really do support what Forge is doing. And I think it's I actually even like the sort of multi-audiences that you're trying to reach, whether it's students, the community, just innovation in general. I think that's what our economy needs to be vibrant, and that's great. I appreciate all that you guys are doing.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for another Forge Fireside, and we'll see you in a month. Bye now.
Thank you.